Welcome to the 72CM podcast. I'm Chad with 72 Cowboy Media. Welcome to episode 3. Okay, so this particular episode, I wanted to delve into the movie culture part of my podcast, and I had thought about doing a top 10 Western, or some like my top 10 favorite Western movies, and I decided that this particular episode I was going to focus in on one movie, one that has always been, one of my favorites, and we recently lost one of its stars, Val Kilmer. Recently passed away, and that was probably one of his best, I think, anyway, best westerns he's ever did, best caricatures that he ever created for that particular movie, and it was a portrayal of the time that Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday showed up at the OK Corral or Tombstone, Arizona, and all the things that happen around that particular town. It was a silver mining town, to be exact. So, and the history of the OK Corral and the Cowboys that kind of ran that part of the country. The other interesting part about Tombstone, or at the very least, Kurt Russell had sort of the energy he had brought to the character Wyatt Earp, which, in my mind, that's what sets this movie apart from some of the other movies that they had made in the past, where I think for once Kurt Russell was trying to bring a certain amount of realism to the character Wyatt Earp. He had not been a perfect man. He had had a checkered past, in essence, even though he did serve as a lawman. The other part was that he had been flawed. If you remember the story, when him and some of his brothers had came to Tombstone, they were looking for a different way of life. They wanted to live a different type of life, something better for their family. And he had brought his wife along at the time, and she had been suffering from headaches and whatnot, and had been taking laudanum, which was sort of a drug at the time to kind of take care of the headaches. And so the relationship that they had sort of waned, and he was just looking for a better life. He didn't want to get involved. And at the time when they showed up at Tombstone, it was a booming town. There was a bunch of silver mines that had been discovered. And so it sort of turned into a town. A lot of those times and towns back in the Old West days were founded on either the railroad coming through and a town was formed, or there was, a mining operation where there was gold, silver, or whatever kind of mineral that was valuable at the time that they had created a town. So this was a flourishing town. This was a booming town of sorts. People were moving there and, building saloons. And that's essentially what they did, is they wanted to own a saloon to help make themselves a bunch of money. And so that character and the characters, the brothers and so on and so forth, were just trying to live in a normal life. And you had that sense about that movie. It was somewhat romantic. It was somewhat violent. It was somewhat, understandable of all the flawed, people that were within it and the trouble that had come about, and dealing with the Cowboys, or, sort of a Old West mob version of, a group of individuals that were basically running the town and running free and doing whatever they wanted. They came up against Wyatt Earp and his group of people that wanted to stand up for something. Another part of the movie Tombstone that I really appreciate, and I think is what gives it its uniqueness, is there was the part of the movie where Doc Holliday and Johnny Ringo had met in the saloon, and I think some of us call it the Latin scene, and basically it's sort of an introduction to those two characters in a setting that, it was full of, people. They were meeting the actors that had acted a show that evening. And so they had gathered at the saloon that Wyatt Earp was working in. And so Doc Holliday and Johnny Ringo had sort of introduced themselves. And what's unique about this particular scene is they spoke to each other in Latin. It kind of started out in English and then they went into Latin. And, you know, how Val and Michael had brought that scene together and so intense and unique and sort of this charismatic, romantic feel about it. And it just brought you in. It kind of, at any moment, you thought they could take each other out. But it kind of set a tone. And sometimes those are hard. Those particular scenes or that chemistry, on-screen chemistry, is really hard to create unless you have really dedicated actors. And those two guys in particular made that movie, made that relationship between those two, because eventually they would finish that story. They had met after the OK Corral fight. They had met on the street, but Johnny Ringo wasn't quite in the proper mind. But they eventually met each other at the end, towards the end of the movie, where they had their famous duel. And so it was just those particular characters and those particular actors bringing out those characters. And that's really, you know, one of the great things about this particular movie. And, you know, basically the final climax of the movie, the scene where after they had attacked Wyatt and his family, and then he went on a tear with Doc Holly and all his friends and basically wiped out the Cowboys. And so it just had this, you know, violent, and it kind of told a story of the Old West. And as much as we have probably romanticized it or thought it was one way, and it really was kind of a violent time. There wasn't a lot of law that could administrate law in those territories, in those early states, in those times when things were, you know, wild and free and, you know, still pioneering and finding, you know, new settlements all across the United States. So in my mind, this movie was just a unique way of telling the story of Wyatt Earp and different. And it sets itself apart from probably the other OK Corral movies or, you know, caricatures of Wyatt Earp and what did he really think or how did he really feel? I think this particular movie that's what gives its in my mind, its prowess and why it's definitely one of my top 10 favorite Western movies of all time. And, you know, those Westerns, whether it's right or wrong or good morals or bad morals or you know, way of life, it tells a story. It tells a great story. And I've always glommed onto that because of my dad watching John Wayne movies, all that kind of stuff. And I will, you know, believe in those and watch those old movies over and over again because they're timeless. They're classics. Well, thanks for watching the latest episode of the 72CM podcast. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, comment, share it with other people. Make sure you follow me on Facebook, Instagram, here on YouTube, and on TikTok. Follow, like, and subscribe to those channels as well. And I hope you truly are enjoying these episodes as I bring these out because there's more in store, more ideas I want to talk about. And I want to thank you for watching the 72CM podcast.